slouched slightly in her window seat, her head tilted toward the glass, pretending to nap. Row 22 was unremarkable, just another spot on Flight 314, a routine cross-country trip from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C. to any casual observer. She was a tired traveler, quietly blending in with the hum of conversation, the clatter of carts, and the gentle drone of the engines. Her duffel bag rested at her feet, nondescript yet heavy with items that could pass for ordinary luggage. His hair, pulled into a loose bun, hid the faint outline of a tattoo peeking from behind her ear. She'd learned long ago that appearances could be deceiving. Around her, families argued quietly over armrests. A man in a polo shirt flipped through a magazine with exaggerated interest, and a young woman whispered into her phone. Noticed it all, cataloging every detail. Not out of paranoia, habit. A lifetime in Delta Force had made her senses razor-sharp, even in mundane situations. Every twitch of muscle, every nervous glance, every hesitant movement was data. Her mind measured distances, calculated trajectories, and predicted reactions, all while appearing utterly ordinary. Turbulence rocked the plane lightly, sending a shiver up the aisle. Fingers itched subtly, instinct kicked in. Years of high-stakes missions had taught her to never ignore the small signs. Something felt off, not immediately dangerous, just out of rhythm. She scanned the cabin discreetly, her eyes flicking over passengers, noting the minor irregularities that most would dismiss. A man rubbing his hands too fast, a woman too intent on her laptop screen, a teen constantly shifting in his seat. Each observation was filed away, like pieces of a puzzle she had yet to solve. She adjusted her, the leather strap clicking softly. A toddler behind her wailed briefly, and a mother soothed him, smoothing his hair. Gaze softened for a fleeting second. Humanity persisted even in sterile steel tubes at 30,000 feet, but she was always alert. There was no room for vulnerability in her line of work. One mistake could cost lives. She had learned that lesson countless times in training, countless more on missions the public would never hear about. Shifted subtly, drawing her legs closer under her seat. She watched the overhead compartments click closed as passengers settled in, eyes still flicking to flight attendants moving down the aisles. Conversations continued, laugh tracks of ordinary life, oblivious to the world outside this metal cylinder. She heard the rustle of a newspaper, the soft tap of a tablet, and the occasional cough. Her breathing remained calm, steady, controlled. Patience was her weapon. Waiting for the right moment, the right movement, was second nature. Somewhere deep in the cockpit, the pilot adjusted his course. Didn't yet know why, but her instincts whispered caution. This was no ordinary flight, even if nothing obvious had happened yet. She let her gaze drift to the small child gripping a plush toy across the aisle, a reminder of why vigilance mattered. Each life on this plane was fragile, precious, unaware of the shadow of danger creeping closer. Closed her eyes briefly, pretending sleep again, but her mind remained wide awake. She mentally rehearsed scenarios: turbulence, evacuation, cabin panic. Every movement was a calculation. She was ready even if no one around her suspected it. The ordinary flight, the mundane hum of routine, could shift into chaos in seconds. And when it did, she would be ready. A faint chime from the intercom made her ears perk. His head tilted slightly. The voice was calm, but something about it, something almost imperceptible, made her sit up. She didn't yet know the words, but instinct whispered, "Pay attention." This flight was about to change, and row 22 would not be just another seat. The intercom crackled again, louder this time, cutting through the hum of the cabin. "Is there a Delta Force sniper aboard?" The words hung in the air like a gunshot. Conversations died mid-sentence. A collective, subtle gasp swept through the passengers. Eyes snapped open fully. She scanned the cabin quickly, noting the sudden rigidity in everyone's posture. Flight attendants paused mid-step, unsure if this was some strange announcement or a real emergency. The voice from the cockpit remained calm, professional, but the urgency was unmistakable. She felt a familiar surge of adrenaline, not fear, just focus. Her training clicked on automatically. This wasn't a drill. Not yet. Somewhere on this plane, a threat was active, and she was the only one with the skill set to handle it. The hum of the engines continued, indifferent to the sudden spike in tension. His mind cataloged passengers instantly. The nervous man in a business suit too rose back, the woman frantically texting, the small child clutching his mother's hand so tightly his knuckles whitened. His eyes locked onto the man in the suit. He adjusted his briefcase nervously, almost imperceptibly. The weight of it was wrong, too heavy, not bulky enough for clothing or electronics, and yet his movements screamed intent. The slight tremor in his hands betrayed stress, but also skill, perhaps desperation. The briefcase wasn't ordinary luggage. Instincts sharpened. She observed his shoulders, his subtle shifting of weight, the glint of metal peeking from a seam. She already knew the potential danger it posed. Other passengers were beginning to murmur, whispers mixing with the soft drone of engines and the occasional squeak of a seat. Some turned to stare at, sensing the tension she radiated, unaware of why. Her presence alone was commanding, but she allowed herself to remain calm and still, blending in while maintaining the perfect vantage point. Every movement she made was deliberate, unnoticeable, but calculated. Flight attendants looked uneasy, glancing toward the cockpit and then to the rear of the plane. Noted their indecision. They had no idea what they were dealing with. She had to act carefully. Too much attention could set off the threat prematurely. Her Delta Force training drilled this into her. Assess, contain, neutralize, protect civilians, all while remaining invisible. She mentally mapped the aisles, calculating distances between the suspect, the cockpit, and the nearest exit. Every second mattered. The man in the suit shifted again, glancing nervously toward the overhead compartment, then down the aisle. Adjusted her posture slightly, ensuring she remained in his line of sight without making it obvious. Her heartbeat remained calm, controlled. The passenger's fear was mounting, but she couldn't allow them to panic. Panic was dangerous, a variable she couldn't control. Another passenger leaned over to whisper a question to their companion, breaking the tension for a moment, but barely registered it. Her focus was laser-sharp, monitoring, predicting, calculating. This flight, which had seemed ordinary just minutes ago, had become a high-stakes environment in an instant. Realize the plane itself, its confined space, limited exits, and altitude, was both a risk and an advantage. Any sudden move could escalate quickly, but the tight quarters also meant the threat could be controlled if she acted precisely. She repositioned her duffel slightly, subtly ensuring it could shield both her and an unsuspecting passenger if necessary. The intercom remained silent after the pilot's question, amplifying the tension. Whispers spread, eyes darted, and his mind raced. This was her element, the calm within chaos, the observer in the storm. And now more than ever, she knew the Delta Force sniper aboard this flight had to act. Leaned back slightly, eyes narrowing, ready. Row 22 was no longer just a seat. It had become a command post. Eyes never left the man in the suit. His movements were deliberate but jittery, each shift betraying both intent and hesitation. From her position in row 22, she could see the faint glint of metal peeking from his briefcase. Her instincts screamed that this was no ordinary passenger. The subtle tremor in his fingers, the careful way he adjusted his seat, the repeated glances toward the cockpit, every detail was a sign. She cataloged them mentally, preparing for action. Patience, observation, patience again. Delta Force training had drilled it into her. Never act hastily. Timing was everything. Passengers remained oblivious, most caught in their own distractions. A young mother attempted to soothe her fussy baby, a businessman scrolled endlessly through his phone, and a teen fiddled with his headphones. Yet could see the growing tension ripple through the cabin, even if no one understood its source. A stewardess paused mid-step, her gaze flitting toward the suspicious man, curiosity and unease evident, but she had no way of understanding the true danger. The man shifted again, inching closer to the rear emergency exit. His pulse remained steady. She noted the weight of his briefcase. It was heavier than it should have been for ordinary items, yet small enough to conceal something lethal. The slight bulge of wires at one corner caught her trained eye. Her mind ran through possibilities, contingency plans, and quick neutralization techniques. Every movement in the cabin became data. The man's posture, his grip, the angle of his briefcase. Suddenly he glanced toward the galley where flight attendants were beginning to murmur among themselves. His eyes narrowed. The man was calculating, aware of observation, yet he underestimated her. That confidence, that slight arrogance would be his weakness. She adjusted her posture subtly, ensuring she was positioned between him and the cockpit. Her duffel bag rested at her side, an unassuming shield if needed. The flight continued, seemingly ordinary to the untrained eye. Turbulence rattled the plane gently, passengers shifted uneasily, and the soft drone of engines filled the gaps in conversation. But for every sound, every movement, every flicker of light mattered. She could anticipate actions before they happened. A man's nervous glance at an overhead compartment suggested impatience. His repeated fidgeting hinted at imminent action. The wires in the briefcase confirmed her suspicion. This was a device capable of catastrophic damage. Her mind mapped every possible outcome. If the device was activated, the confined space of the plane would amplify the danger. She mentally rehearsed neutralization techniques, positioning strategies, and restraint methods. Passengers had to remain unaware. Panic would multiply the threat. Every second, every inch mattered. His calm exterior masked the intensity of her calculations. A subtle spark from the briefcase caught her eye. The man didn't notice. He was too focused on his next movement. That small, almost imperceptible flash confirmed it. The device was live. His breath remained steady, her posture relaxed, yet she was ready to spring into action. She adjusted her bag slightly, positioning it to block any accidental movement toward the device. The plane seemed to hold its breath. Passengers fidgeted, the child across the aisle clutched a toy too tightly, the mother's eyes darted nervously. No one understood what was happening, but's mind raced faster than the engines could roar. Every second of inaction increased risk. She needed control, observation, and precision, the perfect blend of stealth and readiness. The man in the suit shifted once more, bringing the briefcase closer to his chest, recognized the subtle rhythm of someone preparing for a decisive move. Now, it was no longer a waiting game. Patience had brought her to the moment of action. Row 22 was no longer just a seat. It was the vantage point from which she would control the situation and protect every life aboard, adjusted slightly in her seat, pretending to shift for comfort. In reality, every movement was deliberate, a calculated repositioning. The man in the suit continued to inch forward, his briefcase cradled against his chest, wires faintly visible at the corner. She observed him closely, cataloging the angle of his approach, the rhythm of his breaths, and the subtle tension in his shoulders. Her training kicked in fully now. This was no ordinary threat, and every step had to be precise. Row 22 was now her command post, a strategic vantage point from which she could act without revealing her presence. Passengers around her remained blissfully unaware, lost in their distractions. A child played with a tablet, a man flipped through the pages of a magazine, and a woman tried to soothe her restless toddler. All around, the hum of engines and the occasional squeak of luggage wheels created a deceptive normalcy, yet saw what no one else did, the invisible threat inching closer to potential disaster. The man's every motion was deliberate, calculated, yet impatient, a dangerous combination. Slid her duffel bag slightly under her seat, ensuring it could serve as a shield if needed. Her posture shifted imperceptibly, aligning her with the man while keeping passengers between them and her. Every inch counted. Her mind raced through possibilities. If he moved too quickly, she would intercept. If he hesitated, she would maintain her position and readjust. Delta Force training had drilled these micro-movements into her muscle memory. In her mind, this plane had become a battlefield, and every passenger an asset she had to protect. Flashbacks flickered through her mind, each a reminder of past missions. Sniper training, hostage rescues, high-stakes confrontations, all required the same principle: patience, observation, timing. She had neutralized threats silently before, and this situation was no different. The confined space amplified the risk, but also her control. If she acted correctly, she could contain the threat without anyone realizing the danger they had narrowly escaped. The man's briefcase shifted again, bumping against his leg. A faint glimmer of sparks reflected off the metal wires inside. He had not noticed. His pulse remained steady. Adrenaline fueled her focus, not panic. Her mind calculated distances: 3 steps to the aisle, 2 to the nearest passenger, 4 to the cockpit. Every movement of his was now predictable. She visualized intercepting his actions, stabilizing the device, restraining him, all without alarming anyone. The cabin seemed to shrink around her awareness. Every whisper, cough, and rustle became a source of information. Passengers began to sense tension, but they couldn't place it. His presence projected calm, masking the danger. The flight attendants glanced nervously toward the back, unaware of what already knew. The briefcase could detonate in moments if mishandled. Her silent authority anchored the cabin. The man in the suit took another step toward the exit, unaware that now controlled the space between him and the plane's critical areas. She subtly shifted her legs, aligning herself perfectly. Her bag, her hands, her position, all were calculated to allow interception with minimal risk. Every second mattered. Every imperceptible movement brought her closer to controlling the situation. His breath remained steady, her gaze locked on the man. The briefcase's faint spark was a signal. He might act at any moment. Her mind calculated angles, lines of sight, potential panic reactions from passengers, patience, observation, positioning, the 3 pillars of survival. She was ready. Row 22 was no longer just a seat. It was the launch point for action, for control, for protecting every life aboard, and the moment to act was approaching. Turbulence rattled the plane more forcefully now, shaking drinks and rattling trays. The man in the suit flinched, and for a brief instant the briefcase tilted. Sparks flickered at the corner where wires protruded. His trained eyes locked on the threat. This was her opening. Years of Delta Force experience had honed her reflexes. She knew precisely when to act. One misstep could trigger disaster, yet hesitation could be equally deadly. Every calculation, every movement in her body was exact. She shifted slightly, moving her duffel bag in front of her with subtle precision. It was a shield, a barrier, and a tool all at once. The man's gaze darted nervously to the galley. Flight attendants murmured among themselves, unaware of the danger looming just a few rows ahead. Passengers fidgeted, some exchanging confused glances. Calm composure masked the tension coiling within. Her mind calculated angles and trajectories, predicting the man's next move, visualizing restraint techniques. She knew the briefcase could be heavy, unwieldy, and unstable. One wrong move could set it off. With a sudden, controlled motion, positioned herself between the man and the rear exit. Her legs shifted subtly, elbows flexed, and hands hovered near the duffel bag. The man's next movement was almost predictable. He would attempt to steady the briefcase, perhaps trigger it accidentally in the process. Reflexes were ready. The first spark of motion was all she needed to intercept. She acted with quiet precision. One hand guided the briefcase slightly off balance while the other pressed firmly against the man's forearm. The sudden resistance startled him, but the movement was controlled and smooth like a carefully rehearsed maneuver. His body acted on instinct, a combination of strength, leverage, and trained restraint. She didn't shout. The passengers remained unaware of the unfolding crisis. To them, it looked like an ordinary jostle in the aisle. The briefcase teetered dangerously, adjusted its angle with her duffel, cushioning its fall and preventing sparks from triggering the wires. Her grip was firm, controlled, and precise. The man struggled briefly, confusion and frustration flickering across his face, but calm dominance overpowered him. Every action was deliberate, minimizing risk to the civilians around her. She whispered low, commanding words, precise instructions she knew he couldn't ignore. Passengers shifted nervously, some sensing tension, but none could pinpoint its source. A child clutched a plush toy, and a mother's eyes flicked anxiously toward the rear, but its calculated posture projected authority and control. The turbulence shook again, and the man's briefcase moved slightly. stabilized it immediately, her duffel bag absorbing the shift. Every action was timed to perfection, every movement silent but decisive. Assess the cabin. The man was now off balance, his leverage compromised. She subtly pressed his shoulder downward, using body weight to pin him without alerting others. Her eyes never left the sparks at the briefcase. She calculated each micro-movement to avoid ignition. Minutes stretched like hours as she maintained control, her focus absolute. Finally, the man froze under her precise hold, realizing he was no longer in command of the situation. His calm, disciplined presence dominated the aisle. The threat was contained, though still active. Row 22 had transformed from a simple seat into the epicenter of a carefully controlled crisis. Skills had bought precious moments of safety. The plane hummed steadily, passengers oblivious, but the danger remained neutralized for now. Breathing remained measured, her mind alert, ready for the next necessary move. She had created order from chaos, silently, invisibly, like a shadow of protection. The first decisive move had been executed flawlessly, but the mission was far from over. The man's briefcase wobbled dangerously, but its grip remained firm. Her duffel bag acted as both shield and barrier, absorbing sparks and masking her subtle movements. He struggled, trying to regain control, but every attempt was met with calculated resistance. His training turned muscle memory into instinct. Her actions were precise, fluid, and unnoticeable to anyone else in the cabin. To passengers, it appeared as if she had merely shifted in her seat. In reality, she was neutralizing a deadly threat mid-flight, every second ticking closer to disaster. The man's eyes widened as he realized he had been outmaneuvered. He had prepared meticulously, yet he had not accounted for the quiet woman in row 22. His calm dominance radiated authority. Every motion she made conveyed control. Her hands moved with precision, adjusting his arm to prevent accidental activation of the wires. The briefcase teetered but remained contained. The air seemed thick with tension, but she maintained the illusion of ordinary flight behavior. Passengers murmured nervously, glancing at one another, sensing unease without understanding why. His mind cataloged their positions, potential panic points, and escape routes. One sudden noise, one abrupt movement could ignite chaos. She kept her breathing steady, her pulse calm, and her eyes locked on the man. Her voice, low and authoritative, instructed him without alarming others. He froze under her command, realizing resistance was futile. The turbulence intensified slightly, rattling the cabin and increasing the stakes. Adjusted her posture, leaning slightly to stabilize the briefcase while simultaneously restraining the man's wrist. Every action was rehearsed, perfected, and executed with surgical precision. A passenger's tray table rattled, but the man didn't notice. His calm focus maintained order, masking the life-or-death struggle occurring just steps away. She assessed the plane's interior in seconds, exits, aisles, and passengers' positions. The man was now fully immobilized, his leverage gone. Subtly shifted her body, placing him in a seated position against the aisle wall. Her duffel bag provided a final shield between him and the cabin. Sparks still flickered faintly from the wires, but she adjusted the angle perfectly, preventing ignition. Every movement was controlled, minimal, and deliberate. The man struggled one final time, panic flashing in his eyes. Used a combination of weight, balance, and leverage to pin him firmly. Her words were calm but commanding, echoing with the authority of someone who had faced far worse and survived. The cabin remained unaware. Passengers shifted nervously but continued to believe it was nothing more than a minor incident. His eyes never left the briefcase. She knew the threat was contained, but the device remained live. Her hands adjusted slightly, her duffel acting as a buffer, absorbing any dangerous sparks. The man slumped slightly under her control, exhaustion and fear evident. She maintained pressure, ensuring no sudden movements could set off the device. Delta Force training demanded total control, and she had it. Minutes passed like hours. His calm dominance held the situation in perfect balance. The plane hummed steadily, passengers oblivious, yet lives hung in precarious suspension. Finally, the man's resistance ceased. His body went slack under her control, realizing defeat. His focus never wavered, her attention unwavering as she prepared to hand him over to authorities upon landing. Row 22 had become the epicenter of silent heroism. His calculated actions had prevented catastrophe. The plane remained airborne, passengers safe, completely unaware that a Delta Force sniper had quietly, invisibly saved them all. Every movement had been precise, every second critical. The confrontation was over, but the aftermath and the world outside the cabin would soon acknowledge her invisible courage. The plane touched down with a slight jolt, tires screeching against the tarmac. His posture remained calm, her face neutral, though her mind never stopped scanning. Passengers remained seated, some exchanging glances, others oblivious to the drama that had unfolded just rows away. Flight attendants moved quickly, ushering people off with practiced efficiency, still unaware of the life-threatening incident that had just been contained. Remained in row 22 until the last possible moment, ensuring the restrained man stayed in position and the briefcase remained secure. As the cabin emptied, the authorities arrived. Security personnel swarmed the aircraft, moving with urgency, their eyes wide as they assessed the scene. Had guided the man subtly toward a corner, neutralizing him fully without alarming the passengers. To them, it had appeared as a minor disturbance. To the agents, it was a potential disaster narrowly avoided. They swiftly handcuffed the suspect, secured the device, and began questioning. Stepped back, silent, her identity still hidden. Passengers began murmuring in confusion and relief, some noticing the heavy security. Whispers traveled down the aisles. What happened back there? Did anyone see him? Was someone hurt? The plane had landed safely, but the weight of the unknown hung in the air. Calm demeanor drew curious eyes, but she offered nothing. She knew that her mission was to act, not to be recognized. Recognition had never been her goal. Outside, media crews and airport officials swarmed. Flashing cameras and urgent questions flooded the scene, but slipped into anonymity. Delta Force operatives were trained for precisely this: action without acknowledgement, intervention without fanfare. Passengers might never know the identity of the woman in row 22, but they would feel the invisible thread of protection she had woven across the cabin. Lives had been preserved, chaos averted, and yet the world would remain unaware of the quiet hero who saved them. Authorities meticulously examined the briefcase, finding a sophisticated device capable of catastrophic destruction. They began taking statements from the crew and passengers, piecing together what little evidence there was. Panic, confusion, and relief mingled in the air. Observed quietly from a distance, noting the meticulous work of the agents. Everything was procedural, controlled, but her mind remained sharp, aware of lingering risks. One misstep in handling the device could have triggered disaster. Passengers, now deplaned, began telling their stories. Social media buzzed with speculation. A woman claimed she noticed someone acting strangely. A man reported an unremarkable figure shifting in their seat. But the larger truth remained hidden. A trained Delta Force sniper had saved over 100 lives without anyone realizing it. Watched silently, a ghost in the midst of gratitude and curiosity. She was proud, but recognition was irrelevant. Duty, precision, and protection had been her only concerns. A child across the terminal clutched a toy, still unaware of the danger narrowly avoided. Parents whispered reassurances, and the crowd began to disperse. Observed briefly, allowing herself a tiny exhale of relief. The threat had been neutralized and no lives were lost. Yet her mind had already shifted, evaluating every step, every movement, and every potential risk encountered during the flight. She disappeared into the crowd seamlessly, her civilian guise intact. Delta Force operatives rarely lingered for applause. Their victories were measured in lives saved, in invisible threads of protection woven quietly into the world. Silent actions had ensured safety, preserved order, and averted catastrophe. Row 22, her vantage point, would never be remembered publicly, but the echoes of her heroism would ripple silently through countless lives. forever shaping the narrative of a flight that could have ended in tragedy. Weeks passed since Flight 314 landed safely, but the memory of that day lingered in whispers. Passengers shared fragmented stories, each retelling growing more dramatic, yet no one could identify the woman who had saved them. Remained invisible, her life returning to quiet routine, blending seamlessly back into anonymity. She walked the streets of Washington, D.C., a stranger in plain sight, her presence unremarkable, yet the weight of the mission rested lightly on her shoulders. Duty, as always, had been fulfilled without recognition. In her small apartment, unpacked her duffel bag, carefully arranging items as if each had a purpose beyond ordinary travel. Her mind replayed every moment on the flight, the glint of wires, the subtle tremor of a man's hand, the delicate balance of restraint and safety. She analyzed her own actions, noting each precise movement, each calculated adjustment, as if reviewing a completed mission log. For success wasn't applause or accolades. It was efficiency, precision, and the preservation of lives. The media had caught wind of the incident. Passengers, fragmented accounts appeared online in newspapers and on social media. Speculation ran wild. Some claimed heroics from a mysterious passenger, others exaggerated details of the suspected attack. But no journalist could locate the quiet woman who had orchestrated safety from Row 22. Read the stories briefly, then set them aside. The world would never know her name, and that was exactly how she preferred it. At the gym, she maintained her training regimen, every movement a blend of discipline and reflex. Delta Force had taught her that skills must never lapse, and threats could appear anywhere at any time. Row 22 had been one battle. Life presented countless others. Her mind drifted occasionally to the families aboard that flight, the parents who still held their children tightly, the passengers who would never forget the tension in the air. She had safeguarded them without their knowledge. That was the essence of her life: silent intervention, invisible heroism. Sometimes, imagine the passengers telling their stories in years to come. They would speak of fear, relief, and gratitude for an unknown savior. Perhaps they would never know her face, her name, or the depth of her skill. But she didn't need them to. The lives she preserved carried forward her legacy silently, a ripple effect of courage and training that extended far beyond her awareness. Recognition was fleeting. Impact was permanent. Often reflected on duality, the ordinary exterior versus the extraordinary interior. Row 22 had seemed mundane, yet it became the fulcrum of life and death. That duality defined her life. A civilian among strangers, a Delta Force operative poised for action. She had become a ghost in the crowd, a guardian who existed only when needed, disappearing before attention could find her. Each mission, each moment of quiet heroism reinforced a principle she held above all: protect, observe, act, and vanish. Even in mundane daily life, her mind remained alert. A crowded subway, a bustling market, a long airport line saw the world as both ordinary and potential battlefield. Vigilance was instinct. Her calm demeanor concealed awareness honed over decades. She carried the responsibility of unseen protection wherever she went. Row 22 had been a single instance, but countless others awaited, invisible crises demanding invisible solutions. As the sun set over the city, sat on a park bench watching life unfold. Children laughed, joggers ran past, and strangers moved unknowingly through the rhythms of ordinary days. She allowed herself a small smile. Her work had been done. Lives had been preserved. The quiet strength in Row 22 had changed the outcome of one flight forever, yet the world would remain unaware. Some heroes never reveal themselves. Some victories are never celebrated. But everyone feels their presence, even when they do not know the name behind it. Seated quietly on that park bench, understood this truth better than anyone. Row 22 was empty now, but the legacy of her silent courage would endure, unseen, unheralded, but undeniably real.